Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. We are in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 15. Let's start in verse 1. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a complaint or case would come to me, and I would see that he gets justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take a hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Absalom has been brought back to Jerusalem, and lived for a period of time without seeing King David. And then King David finally brought him in and kissed him, embraced him. Absalom bowed down to him. But there's no evidence that King David ever saw him again. Absalom has now completed his transformation from seeking justice for his sister to being in exile to being back in Israel. And now he has his eye on the kingship. He wants to be king. He's actually fourth oldest brother. Of course, Amnon, the one he killed, was the oldest. So he's third in line for the throne, if you think of it in that way. We don't have much on the others. Only one of them gets mentioned again. And we'll get to that when we get to that, but we will not get to that in 2 Samuel. That's in Kings. And Absalom has decided that he's going to do things the way his mother's people do. He's been back there living with his relatives there. He's been learning at his mother's feet. He's gone there and seen it in action. He's got training, so to speak, there. And then he comes back to Israel, and he's trying a publicity campaign. He is flat lying about David and David's government. He's saying there's nobody to judge the Israelites, that they have a valid case, but there's no one to hear you. Actually, David had judges. David had people that could hear the cases. But Absalom is intercepting before they get to the legitimate government, to the legitimate judges, and is judging Israel. And because he's David's son, people are going to assume that he should be allowed to. And as long as he's casting fairly good judgments, making fairly sound judgments, people are going to think he's doing a good job and therefore should be king. And he's also trying to win people's hearts. It was appropriate for the people to bow down before him. Let's face it, he was prince. He would probably be their king. So it's appropriate for them to do obeisance to him. That he wouldn't let them do that and instead would embrace them, kiss them, and act like they were his best friend. The people thought he's one of the people. This is like David was. David was a shepherd, and David has always had the heart of the peasants in mind, Now, Absalom, he's my friend. And if Absalom was really being their friend, this would have been a good idea. But Absalom is putting on the act. He's wanting to win their hearts and wanting to win their loyalty without actually doing anything for it. His judgments have no force of law. If the people that he has judgments for think it does and they act that way and he follows the law, well, he's actually, from the legitimate judge's viewpoint, enforcing the law. It's not that big a deal. The bureaucracy was probably not such that everybody that was a judge knew who else David appointed as judges. So, maybe if I hear about Absalom casting a judgment, but he's doing it right, maybe David, his dad, appointed him to be a judge and gave him some responsibilities that I don't know about. As long as he's doing the job well, it's not my business to check him out. And he does this to win people's hearts, that they would think he's king material and that he's on their side. Verse 7. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living in Geshur in Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. Now, Hebron was where David ruled first. And in the common man's viewpoint, it is where David was from, where he was a first anointed king. It was the place to anoint kings. The common man does not remember Saul and his appointment. Some of the very oldest people may remember that, but let's face it, it's probably been 60 years. Very few people remember Saul's anointing. And they're the old folks. Absalom is trying to go and appear like he's been appointed king. Hebron was where he viewed the king should be anointed. And so he's going to go to Hebron and celebrate and fulfill his, a quote, vow to the Lord, his promise to the Lord. What he promised was to himself that he would make himself king, and he's going to Hebron to do that. This isn't Yahweh he made a promise to. However, he will worship Yahweh there in the way they worshipped. He will bring his conspiracy together there. Verse 10. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilgal, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's followers kept on increasing. So Absalom goes to Hebron. He sends messengers throughout Israel announcing that he's going to be anointed as king. And he brings in people who look like they're from David. And some of them have been in the court. And to an outsider that doesn't know the inside workings of the court, it looks like David has anointed Absalom king, or at least appointed him king. And he has the wise advisor that will give him sound advice and understand David and what David would do. And so he's going to have wise counsel. Absalom has planned this well. Of course, he's not a man after God's own heart, and God doesn't approve of it. And God is going to protect David and is going to frustrate Absalom, because this is part of how God's getting rid of Absalom. He doesn't want him ruling. He would be an absolute disaster for Israel. He would take them away from the worship of Yahweh. Verse 13. A messenger came and told David, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword." The king's officials answered him, "Your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses." The king set out with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. So the king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at a place some distance away. All his men marched past him, along with all the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and all 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath marched before the king. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you come along with us? Go back and stay with King Absalom. You are a foreigner and exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday, and today shall I make you wander about with us when I do not know where I'm going? Go back and take your countrymen. May kindness and faithfulness be with you." But Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there will your servant be." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead and march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched with all his men and the families that were with him. David, when he hears about the conspiracy, decides to flee from Jerusalem. This has always been a mystery to me, but it may have been that he thought that Absalom had the manpower to overtake the fortifications and would know their weaknesses and possibly have people in the city that would let him into the city. And hand-to-hand fighting in city is brutal business. Lots of innocent people would be damaged. Innocent property would be damaged. And the outcome would be a lot less certain. And so David may have chosen that I'm better at fighting wars out in the open. Let's pull him out in the open. And so he flees Jerusalem. I've never heard a good theory for why to do that. I've heard lots of people say lots of things. The simplest explanation is David panicked. I actually don't buy that one. David's not a man to panic. David chose to. And there are consequences to that. One thing, he kept the war out of the city of Jerusalem. So when he wins, he gets to come back to an intact city. The government functions were left intact. You didn't have a civil war among government factions. And you didn't test whether Absalom could lead an army in battle in a city, which is a different kind of fight than David's used to. Normally, by the time they got into an enemy city, They had besieged it. The people in there were weakened with hunger or thirst or whatever. They'd battered down fortifications that overrun it, and then they were facing a weakened enemy as they spilled into the city. And the you know it wasn't hand-to-hand fighting between comparable armies. It was hand-to-hand fighting between David's well-trained, rested, able soldiers and uh, depleted enemy combatants and civilians and disheartened enemy. Having Absalom attack the city may have been a riskier thing than David wanted to take. And if David knew who was with Absalom, he may have thought that they had access to just march into the city without it being properly guarded and would have access. We don't know his reasoning. But he flees. And along the way, there's some very notable groups that go with him. This says something about how David was viewed as a commander and as a um, king. Three of the groups that are mentioned in this passage are basically foreign fighting groups. They're loyal to David. The most prominent of the three is that I'm going to talk about is Idea and the Gittites, who are from Gath. They were Philistines. They had been following David since he had been fleeing Saul and had gone to Gath to be protected there, and then ended up in Ziklag, owning Ziklag. And these 600 men and their families are loyal to David enough that they're going to follow him when there's a civil war in Israel. They're following him when when they attack Philistines, when they attack the Ammonites, he's led them in battle all kinds of places. They're so loyal to him, they're not even loyal to their own people. And they're going to be so loyal to him, they would rather be as part of the government in exile in a civil war than get to stay in peace in Jerusalem and let Absalom be king. Even though David tells them, go back and support my son Absalom when he's king. David's clearly somewhat depressed, somewhat not thinking clear at this point to declare his son king just because he rebelled. But Idea is thinking much cleaner than that, much clearer, and knows that no, Absalom's not a man to follow. I'm going to follow the man that I know. And he also makes his oath on Yahweh's name. He is worshiping Yahweh. He knows David is worshiping Yahweh. He probably knows that Absalom is not worshiping Yahweh. He's been in Geshur, where they're polytheistic, they're Armenians. They are distantly related to Abraham's family before he left Ur. The Armenians descended from the same people that Abraham came out of. So, in one sense, they're relatives of the Jews, the Israelites, but distant relatives. That's part of why David found them so easy to make an alliance with. It's the same kind of people. And They probably had some sort of common heritage. It's been lost to us, but since they're related, it's been a long time in many millennia. But, there's going to be some similarities. But they're polytheistic, they're backstabbing, conniving people, as we see Absalom is. Idiot will know this and go, no, I trust David. He's honest, he's clean, he worships Yahweh truly, and he doesn't make a show of it, he just does it. And so he bets his life that protecting David is safer in a rebellion than sitting in the city and waiting out the civil war. David's going to need him. God knows that. That's why he directed Idiot's heart. The other two groups, the Kerethites and Pelethites, we know less about them ethnically, but they were dedicated fighting forces for David. They're mentioned many times, and in King Solomon's reign, they were a slave people that did labor for the community, helped do things like build the city walls and build the temple and and do the work for that, and that kind of thing. For David, they are dedicated fighting force. So David was not only a man after God's own heart, he was also somebody who could lead foreigners to become Israelites and to be more dedicated to Israel than they were their own people. David really was an amazing leader. And in his downtime, people that conventional wisdom said should be abandoning him and either going home or sitting out the Civil War and supporting whoever won, they said, no, we're picking a side and we're defending David. David has been loyal to his people, and we've seen other evidence, like Uriah the Hittite was one of his officials, that he had people from all over the known world that he had convinced to worship Yahweh. He was doing what God wanted the Israelites to do, to be a priest to the world and invite everybody to worship Yahweh, and he was succeeding at it. People looked up to him enough they were willing to risk their life to protect him and to march with him. That says a whole lot about David. And that Absalom was rebelling against his dad says a whole lot about Absalom. Verse 23, the whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the desert. Zodok was there too, and all the Levites who were with him were carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They sat down the ark of God, and Abithiar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. Then the king said to Zodok, take the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, I am not pleased with you, then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him. The king also said to Zodok the priest, aren't you a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your son Ahimaaz and Jonathan, son of Abithiar. You and Abithiar take your two sons with you. I will wait at the fords in the desert until word comes from you to inform me. So Zodok and Abithiar took the ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. The priest wanted to go with David, and they wanted to bring the ark. Now, this was significant in that the Ark of the Covenant, when it went with Israel, was supposed to encourage them in battle and to show the Lord's favor. The priest made this decision. They would rather stay loyal to David, who had been loyal to Yahweh the whole time, than take a risk on this young, impetuous, maybe he's worshiping Yahweh and maybe he's worshiping the gods of his mother's people, of Absalom. They knew trouble when they saw it, and they knew David would be a sure bet for them. He had his plans to build the temple. He had plans for people to worship Yahweh. And they were helping him develop those plans. Zodek and Abithiar are priests that have consulted God for him for battle, for other things. They're regular advisors. They've prospered under him. And they know that. Will Absalom treat them as well? They're betting not. But on the advice of the king, and he says, God favors me, I'll come back to Jerusalem, be able to worship Yahweh there and see the ark again. If God is using this to destroy me, then, so be it, God will, and don't risk the ark. He's basically telling them, don't be the kind of fools that Eli's sons were, and took it into battle and it got lost and, risk being destroyed. And also, I need some advisors and some spies in Jerusalem to tell me what's going on. And, y'all have sons. Y'all have a son each. I know the sons know me. The sons can go in and out a whole lot better than their priestly dad and can sneak in and out and come tell me things. So I'll tell you where I'm going to go. I'm going to be at the fords in the desert. And you go send them out to give me advice. And when we know what's going on in Jerusalem. And so they have this plan where David has loyal spies in Jerusalem that he can trust their advice, and they will give him accurate information about what's going on in Jerusalem. Verse 30. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too, and were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, O Lord, turn Ahithophel's advice into foolishness. Then David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God. Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, If you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zodek and Abithiar be there with you? Tell them everything you hear in the king's palace. Their two sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zodek, and Jonathan, son of Abithiar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear. So David's friend Hushai arrived in Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. So David is setting up this spy network. He needs to know what's going on. He needs to know the advice. He needs to know inside information. And this trusted advisor who goes out to meet him, he sends him back into the city and says, go pretend to be loyal to Absalom so you can find out inside information. And then I have the spy network that's come out to tell me, already set up. Go use it to give me the accurate information I need to know. And, he's worried that Ahith, uh, Ahithophel, the advisor, is a very wise man and will understand what David's going to do and anticipate him and give Absalom good advice. So he needs somebody to frustrate that good advice. And he prays to God about it. And then he sends his friend that he knows is loyal back to frustrate things and uh, then be able to give him accurate information. So David is doing a good job as he flees of making sure he knows what's going on and he has good information. Holy Father, you are the wise one. You are the one who sets up kings and takes down kings. You give wisdom and you give grace and you give even foolishness to those who need to not do well. Lord, you were protecting David. You were sending him good advisors and giving him wise directions, having him do wise things, that he would know what was going on with his son and the rebellion and would make sure that advisors could frustrate good plans and give what seemed to be better advice, but was actually not good advice. And you kept David secure and protected him. Lord, have us trust you that you will do the same thing in our life. Even if we're as in the dark as David was. David didn't know whether you were going to protect him or kill him, and he was fine with that. And he was willing to do whatever you were going to do to him. Have us to be that kind of people, that we can, in uncertain times, put our faith so steadily in you that whether good or ill comes, we will trust you and we go with it. That we will have your kingdom first in our mind, not our own needs. In your holy name, Lord. Amen. This has been the Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. And I'm your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church. This has been recorded on Saturday, April 29th, 2023. And I anticipate a wonderful worship service in the Lord tomorrow. I hope to see you there. If not, I hope to see you Wednesday. And if not, I will see you here on YouTube. Have a blessed week.